You eat bread every day without thinking about it. You grab a slice from the bag. Maybe you toast it. Maybe you make a sandwich. Maybe you tear off a piece and dip it in soup. It takes 5 seconds. You don't think about where it came from. You don't think about who made it. You don't think about what it means. But 2,000 years ago, bread wasn't just food. Bread was life. Bread was survival. Bread was sacred. Bread was the difference between living and dying. And in the Bible, from Genesis to the Last Supper, bread appears more than any other food, more than fish, more than wine, more than lamb. Bread, and not just one kind of bread. The Bible describes at least 8 different types of bread, each one made differently, each one for a different purpose, each one with a story that most people have never heard. Some of these breads were for the poor, some were for the rich, some were baked in a hurry, some were prepared with such care that only one family in all of Israel knew the secret recipe, and they refused to share it with anyone. One of these breads was never touched by human hands at all. Today, we're going to walk through all 8 of them, one by one, what they were made of, how they were prepared, why they mattered, and what they meant, not just to the people who ate them, but to the story of God and His people. And the most beautiful part? You can still make almost every single one of them today in your own kitchen, with your own hands, the same way they were made thousands of years ago. Unleavened bread, matzah. This is the bread of urgency, the bread of escape, the bread that was born in the middle of the night, in the middle of a miracle. Exodus chapter 12 tells us the story. The Israelites had been slaves in Egypt for 400 years. God sent 10 plagues. Pharaoh finally broke. And in the middle of the night he told Moses, "Take your people and go, now get out." And the Israelites ran. They grabbed what they could. They had dough prepared, but there was no time to let it rise, no time to wait for the yeast to do its work, no time for anything except to wrap that flat, unrisen dough in their cloaks, throw it over their shoulders, and run into the desert. Exodus 12:39 says, "They baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not delay." That bread, flat, simple, baked in haste, became matzah, and God commanded the Israelites to eat it every year during Passover for 7 days as a reminder that freedom doesn't wait, a reminder that God moves fast when He moves, a reminder that sometimes the most important bread in your life is the one you didn't have time to finish making. How was it made? The ingredients are almost shockingly simple. Flour and water, that's it. Some traditions add a pinch of salt, no yeast, no baking powder, no rising agent of any kind. In ancient times, a woman would take wheat flour or barley flour if the family was poor and mix it with water in a clay bowl. She would knead it quickly with her hands, working the dough just enough to bring it together. Then she would flatten it thin, very thin, maybe 1/4 of an inch, on a flat stone or a piece of wood. And here's the important part. According to Jewish tradition, the entire process, from the moment the water touches the flour to the moment the bread goes into the fire, must take no more than 18 minutes. Because after 18 minutes, natural yeast in the air can begin to ferment the dough. And fermented dough is leavened. And leavened bread is not matzah. 18 minutes. That's all you have. The bread was baked on a hot stone over a fire or pressed against the inner wall of a clay oven called a taboon. Within minutes, it puffed slightly, developed brown spots, and was done. Flat. Crisp on the outside, slightly chewy on the inside. Simple. Pure. Nothing added, nothing hidden. In the Bible, leaven often symbolizes sin. Something that puffs up, something that spreads invisibly, something that changes the nature of what it touches. Unleavened bread, then, is bread without sin, bread of purity, bread of truth. And that's why at the Last Supper, when Jesus broke bread with His disciples, it was unleavened bread. It was Passover. He took the bread of purity, the bread of escape, the bread of freedom, and He said, "This is my body, broken for you. Your recipe today: 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of cold water, half a teaspoon of salt. Mix. Knead for 2 minutes. Roll thin. Cook on a hot skillet, 2 minutes per side. That's it. You just made the same bread the Israelites carried out of Egypt. Leavened bread, the everyday bread. Now let's talk about the bread people actually ate every single day. If matzah was the bread of special occasions, of Passover, of urgency, of ritual, then leavened bread was the bread of normal life. The bread on the table at dinner, the bread you tore apart and shared with your family, the bread that filled the house with that warm, yeasty smell that every human being on earth recognizes. Leviticus 7:13 mentions leavened bread as part of the Thanksgiving offering. Leviticus 23:17 commands that 2 loaves of leavened bread be brought as an offering during the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot. This is one of the only times leavened bread was allowed as an offering to God. Every other bread offering had to be unleavened. But on Shavuot, the celebration of the harvest, God said, "Bring me the bread you actually eat, the real bread, the everyday bread." How was it made? The process started the night before. A woman would save a small piece of dough from the previous batch, a piece that had already begun to ferment. This was her sourdough starter, though she wouldn't have called it that. She would have called it seor, the Hebrew word for leaven. She would mix fresh flour, usually wheat if the family could afford it, barley if they couldn't, with water and a pinch of salt. Then she would work in that piece of old dough. The wild yeast and bacteria in the old dough would begin to ferment the new dough, producing gas that made the bread rise. She would knead the dough on a stone surface, folding it over and over, pressing it with the heels of her hands. Then she would cover it with a cloth and leave it in a warm place, maybe near the cooking fire, maybe in the sun, for several hours, sometimes overnight. By morning, the dough had doubled in size, soft, puffy, alive with tiny bubbles. She would punch it down, shape it into a round loaf, and bake it in the taboon, the dome-shaped clay oven that was the heart of every home. The taboon was heated by burning wood or dried animal dung inside it. When the walls were scorching hot, the woman would slap the dough against the inner wall or place it on a flat stone inside the oven. The bread baked in minutes, the outside turning golden brown and slightly crispy, the inside staying soft and airy. This was the bread Jesus was talking about when he taught his disciples to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." Not fancy bread, not special bread. Just the regular leavened everyday loaf that every family in Palestine depended on to survive. Your recipe today: 3 cups of flour, 1 cup of warm water, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of active dry yeast, or a piece of sourdough starter if you have one. Mix. Knead for 10 minutes. Let rise for 2 hours. Shape into a round loaf. Bake at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. The smell alone will take you back 2,000 years. Barley bread, the poor man's bread. This is the bread that matters most, and it's the bread that gets the least respect. Barley bread was the bread of the poor, the bread of the common people, the bread of shepherds, laborers, fishermen, and farmers. If you were wealthy, you ate wheat bread. If you were everyone else, and almost everyone was everyone else, you ate barley. Barley was cheaper than wheat. It grew faster. It survived in poorer soil. It needed less water. It was the grain of survival, but it also produced a heavier, denser, darker bread, less refined, less elegant, the kind of bread that rich people looked down on. In Judges 7:13, a Midianite soldier has a dream about a round loaf of barley bread tumbling into the camp and knocking down a tent. His companion interprets the dream. The barley loaf is Gideon, the Israelite, a humble, common thing destroying the mighty. Even in dreams, barley bread represented the underdog. But the most important barley bread story in the entire Bible is in John chapter 6. Jesus is on a hillside with 5,000 hungry people. The disciples are panicking, and a boy, a child, steps forward with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. Not wheat loaves, barley loaves, the cheapest bread, the poorest bread, the bread that nobody important would have been caught eating. And Jesus took that humble barley bread, gave thanks, broke it, and fed 5,000 people. He didn't wait for better bread. He didn't ask for wheat. He took what the poor had to offer, and he made it enough. How was it made? Barley bread was made almost the same way as wheat bread, but with one important difference. Barley has very little gluten. Gluten is the protein that makes wheat dough stretchy and elastic. It's what allows bread to rise and hold its shape. Barley doesn't have much of it, so barley bread was denser, heavier, flatter. It didn't rise as much. A woman would grind barley kernels on a stone mill, a saddle quern, pushing a smaller stone back and forth over a larger one until the grain became coarse flour. Barley flour was grittier than wheat flour, rougher. You could feel it between your fingers. She would mix the flour with water and salt and sometimes a bit of old dough for leavening. But even with leaven, barley bread didn't rise much. The loaves were round, flat, and heavy, maybe an inch or two thick, dense enough that you could carry one in your bag all day and it wouldn't fall apart. The bread was baked on a hot stone or in the tabun. It came out dark, almost brown, with a nutty, earthy flavor, not sweet like wheat bread, not light, not fancy, but filling, deeply filling. One loaf of barley bread could keep a working man going for hours. This was the bread of Jesus' world. This was the bread most of the people he walked with, talked with, healed, and loved actually ate every day. Your recipe today: 2 cups of barley flour, available at most health food stores, 1 cup of warm water, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of yeast. Mix, knead gently. Barley dough is stickier and less elastic than wheat. Shape into a flat, round disc about 1 inch thick. Bake at 375 degrees for 20 to 25 minutes. It will be dense and hearty. Eat it with olive oil and a pinch of salt. That's exactly how they ate it. Wheat bread, the fine bread. If barley bread was the bread of the poor, wheat bread was the bread of the blessed. When Abraham saw 3 strangers approaching his tent in Genesis 18:6, he rushed to Sarah and said, "Quick, get 3 seahs of the finest flour, and knead it and bake some bread." The finest flour, not barley, wheat. The best he had because these were important guests, and Abraham didn't know it yet, but he was entertaining angels. When God gave instructions for the grain offerings in Exodus 29:2, he specified fine wheat flour, not barley, not coarse grain, the finest, whitest, most carefully sifted wheat flour available. Wheat bread was lighter, softer, and more delicate than barley bread. It rose higher. It tasted sweeter. It was the bread you served to honored guests, the bread of celebration, the bread of abundance. How was it made? The process was the same as regular leavened bread, but with one crucial difference. The flour was sifted multiple times. A woman would grind wheat kernels on her stone mill, then pass the flour through a sieve made of woven reeds or cloth. The coarse bits, the bran, and the germ were removed. What remained was fine, white powdery flour. The more times you sifted, the finer the flour became, and the finer the flour, the lighter and softer the bread. The finest wheat flour in the ancient world was sifted 7 times. 7. Each pass through the sieve removed more impurities, more roughness, until what remained was almost like silk. This flour was expensive, time-consuming to produce, a luxury. Most families couldn't afford it for everyday use. They saved it for special occasions, for guests, for festivals, for offerings to God. The dough was mixed with water, salt, and leaven, kneaded thoroughly, allowed to rise, and baked in the tabun. The result was a loaf that was golden, fragrant, soft, and beautiful, the kind of bread that made people smile when they saw it on the table. Your recipe today: use the same recipe as the leavened bread above, but use the finest white flour you can find. Sift it twice before mixing. Add a tablespoon of olive oil to the dough for extra softness. The result will be noticeably lighter and more delicate. That's the bread Abraham served to angels. Cakes with oil, the sacred bread. This bread was not for everyday eating. This bread was for God. Exodus 29:2 describes the bread offerings that were to be presented to the Lord, and unleavened bread, and cakes unleavened tempered with oil, and wafers unleavened anointed with oil. Of wheaten flour shalt thou make them. Leviticus 2:4-5 gives more detail. If you bring a grain offering baked in an oven, it is to consist of the finest flour, either thick loaves made without yeast and with olive oil mixed in, or thin loaves made without yeast and brushed with olive oil. These were ritual breads, offering breads, breads made specifically to be presented before God in the tabernacle or the temple. They were never leavened because leaven was forbidden on the altar, and they were always made with olive oil because olive oil in the ancient world represented the Holy Spirit, anointing and consecration. How were they made? There were two types. The first was a thick cake, challah in Hebrew, not to be confused with the modern braided Sabbath bread. Fine wheat flour was mixed with olive oil instead of water, or with a combination of both. The oil made the dough rich, tender, and fragrant. It was kneaded, shaped into round, flat cakes, and baked in the oven. The second type was a thin wafer, rakik in Hebrew. These were rolled extremely thin, almost paper-thin, and then brushed or anointed with olive oil on the surface. They were baked quickly on a hot stone or a flat griddle called a makabet. Both types were unleavened. Both were made with the finest flour. Both were handled with care and reverence because they were not food for people, they were food for God. After being presented as an offering, a portion was burned on the altar, the memorial portion, and the rest was given to the priests to eat. This was part of their sustenance. God fed his priests through the offerings of his people. Your recipe today: 1 cup of fine flour, 3 tablespoons of olive oil, a pinch of salt. Mix until you have a soft dough. Add a tiny bit of water if needed. For thick cakes, shape into small, flat rounds about ½ an inch thick and bake at 400 degrees for 10 minutes. For thin wafers, roll paper thin, brush with olive oil, and bake at 425 degrees for 5 to 7 minutes until lightly golden. No yeast, no leaven, just flour, oil, and fire. Showbread, the bread of the presence. This is the most mysterious bread in the entire Bible, and it's the one that still amazes scholars today. Leviticus 24:5-9 describes it. Take fine flour and bake 12 loaves from it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each loaf, and you shall set them in 2 piles, 6 in a pile, on the table of pure gold before the Lord, and you shall put pure frankincense on each pile. 12 loaves made of the finest wheat flour, arranged in 2 stacks of 6 on a table of pure gold inside the holy place of the tabernacle, and later the temple. Fresh frankincense was placed beside each stack, and the bread was replaced every single Sabbath. The old loaves removed and eaten by the priests, the new loaves set in their place. This bread was always there, always present, always before God. That's why it was called the bread of the presence, lechem hapanim in Hebrew, which literally means bread of the face. It was bread that stood before the face of God. And here's what's extraordinary. According to the Talmud and Josephus, the showbread stayed fresh for an entire week. It didn't go stale, it didn't mold, it didn't dry out. When the priests removed it on the Sabbath to eat it, it was as warm and fresh as the day it was baked. This was considered one of the miracles of the temple. How was it made? Each loaf weighed approximately 5 kilograms, about 11 pounds. That's enormous. Each loaf required 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour, roughly equivalent to about 5 pounds of flour per loaf. The bread was unleavened, baked quickly, so no fermentation could occur. According to the Talmud, there was a family called the Garmu family who were the only ones who knew the secret of preparing the showbread properly. When the temple authorities tried to replace them with bakers from Alexandria, Egypt, the Egyptian bakers could bake the bread, but they couldn't remove it from the oven without breaking it, and their loaves went moldy. The Garmu family was brought back. When asked why they wouldn't teach anyone else their secret, they said, "We know that the temple will be destroyed, and we are concerned that an unworthy man will learn how to bake the showbread and use it to serve an idol." The loaves were shaped in a unique way. Some sources describe them as shaped like an open box or an upside-down letter chat with the sides turned up. Gold molds were used, one for shaping the dough, one for baking, and one for after baking to protect the shape. The bread was baked on Friday because no work could be done on the Sabbath, and placed on the golden table on Saturday morning. This bread was not for common people. It was for God and for the priests who served him. The only exception in the entire Bible is when David, fleeing from King Saul, came to the priest Ahimelech and asked for food. The only bread available was the showbread, and Ahimelech gave it to him. Jesus himself referenced this story in Matthew 12, using it to teach that the law was made for man, not man for the law. Your recipe today. This one is harder to replicate exactly because the secret died with the Garmu family, but you can make a symbolic version. 3 cups of the finest flour you can find, water, and a pinch of salt, no yeast. Knead into a firm dough, shape into a rectangular loaf with raised edges like a shallow box. Bake at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 to 20 minutes. Place it on your table. And remember, for 1,000 years, bread just like this stood before the face of God. Ezekiel bread, the bread of survival. This is the strangest bread in the Bible, and it's the only one where God himself gave the recipe. Ezekiel 4:9 says, "Take thou also unto thee wheat, and barley, and beans, and lentils, and millet, and fitches, spelt, and put them in one vessel, and make thee bread thereof." 6 ingredients, wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, spelt, all mixed together into one bread. Now, before you think this is some kind of ancient superfood recipe, you need to understand the context, because this bread was not a blessing. This bread was a punishment. God told the prophet Ezekiel to lie on his left side for 390 days, and then on his right side for 40 days, a total of 430 days. During that entire time, he was to eat only this bread, and only a small amount, about 8 ounces per day, and he could drink only about 3 cups of water per day. This was a prophetic act. Ezekiel was acting out the coming siege of Jerusalem, the starvation, the rationing, the desperation. When a city is under siege, you don't have the luxury of choosing your ingredients. You take whatever you have left, the last of the wheat, the last of the barley, a handful of dried beans, some lentils from the bottom of the jar, a bit of millet, some old spelt, and you throw it all together. You make bread from scraps, bread from desperation, bread from the bottom of the barrel. That's what Ezekiel bread is. It's famine bread, siege bread, the bread you make when there's nothing else left. And yet, here's the irony. Modern nutritionists have discovered that this combination of grains creates a complete protein. Wheat and barley provide carbohydrates and some amino acids. Beans and lentils provide the amino acids that grains lack. Together, they form a nutritionally complete food. You could survive on this bread alone. God, even in judgment, gave a recipe for survival. How was it made? In Ezekiel's time, all 6 ingredients would have been ground together on a stone mill into a coarse mixed flour. Water was added, and probably nothing else. No oil, no honey, no salt. This was punishment bread. It was meant to be plain, austere, barely palatable. The dough was shaped into small flat cakes and baked over a fire. The original instructions said to bake it over human dung, which Ezekiel protested because it was ritually unclean. God relented and allowed him to use cow dung instead, which was a common fuel in the ancient world and is still used in parts of the Middle East and India today. The result was a dense, heavy, earthy bread with a complex flavor, nutty from the grains, slightly sweet from the millet, with the heaviness of beans and lentils. Not delicious, but sustaining, deeply sustaining. Your recipe today. Here's a modern version: 2½ cups of wheat berries or whole wheat flour, 1½ cups of spelt flour, half a cup of barley, half a cup of millet, a quarter cup of dry green lentils, 2 tablespoons each of dry beans, Great Northern, kidney, pinto. If using whole grains, grind them all together in a blender or grain mill. Mix with 4 cups of warm water, 1 cup of honey, half a cup of olive oil, 2 packets of yeast, and 2 tablespoons of salt. Stir into a loose dough. Pour into 2 greased loaf pans. Let rise for 1 hour. Bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. This modern version is much tastier than what Ezekiel ate, but the spirit is the same. Bread made from everything you have, bread that sustains. Manna, the bread from heaven. And now we come to the last bread, the bread that no human being ever made, the bread that no recipe can reproduce, the bread that came from God's own hand. Exodus 16:31 describes it. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Psalm 78:25 calls it the bread of angels. After the Israelites left Egypt, they wandered into the desert, and they were hungry. They had no farms, no ovens, no grain, no flour, nothing. They complained to Moses, "You brought us out here to die of hunger." And God answered, "Every morning when the dew lifted from the ground, there it was, a thin, flaky substance covering the desert floor, white, delicate, like frost, like tiny seeds." The Israelites looked at it and said, "Manhu," which in Hebrew means, "What is it?" And that became its name, manna. What is it? They gathered it every morning. Each person collected about 2 quarts, an omer. They could grind it in mills, crush it in mortars, boil it in pots, or make it into cakes. It tasted like wafers made with honey, or according to Numbers 11:8, like something made with fresh oil, sweet, rich, delicate. But here's the miracle within the miracle. If you tried to save manna overnight, if you hoarded it, if you didn't trust that God would send more tomorrow, it rotted. It bred worms. It stank. You couldn't store it. You couldn't stockpile it. You had to trust God for tomorrow's bread every single day. The only exception was Friday. On Friday, they could gather a double portion because no manna fell on the Sabbath, and the Friday manna didn't rot. It stayed fresh through Saturday. God provided for the Sabbath rest. For 40 years, the entire time the Israelites wandered in the desert, manna fell from heaven every morning, 40 years. And then, the moment they crossed into the promised land and ate the produce of Canaan for the first time, the manna stopped. It was never seen again. Jesus referenced manna directly in John 6:32-35. "It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. I am the bread of life." Manna was a shadow, a preview, a taste of something greater. The real bread from heaven wasn't a flaky substance on the desert floor. It was a person walking among them, breaking bread with them, giving his body for them. Your recipe today. You can't make manna, no one can. It was a gift, a miracle, a daily reminder that God provides. But you can make something that honors the description. Take 1 cup of fine flour, 2 tablespoons of honey, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and a pinch of salt. Mix into a soft dough, roll thin, cut into small rounds. Bake at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 to 10 minutes until lightly golden. They'll be sweet, delicate, crispy wafers, as close as human hands can get to the bread of angels. Now step back and look at all 8 of these breads together. 8 breads, 8 stories, 8 windows into a world where bread wasn't something you bought in a plastic bag at the store. It was something you made with your hands every single day with whatever God gave you. It was prayer made physical, faith made edible, love made into something you could hold, break, and share. And every single one of them points to the same person. Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. He is the unleavened bread, pure, without sin. He is the daily bread present every morning, faithful every day. He is the barley bread, humble, common, enough for everyone. He is the wheat bread, the finest offering given for honored guests. He is the bread with oil, anointed, consecrated, set apart. He is the showbread, always present before the face of God. He is the Ezekiel bread, sustaining us even in the hardest times. He is the manna, the bread from heaven, that gives life to the world." Every bread in the Bible was always pointing to Him. If this story changed the way you look at the bread on your table and the bread of life who gives meaning to it all, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are uncovering the history that they tried to bury. Let us plant the seeds of the future together. The next treasure of the past will be revealed soon.